out there in Ireland now building 20 megawatt farms, 60 megawatt farms, you know, and all that. And you know, we're not interfering with them at all. This grid will actually be part of the English grid, extended into Ireland. It'll be paid for by the English customer. I mean, that's the most logical way to do it, because they're getting the benefit of the electricity. So, yeah, it's all doable.
And when are you?
When 2017 is we've booked 5,000 megawatts on the grid in the UK, and the first tranche of that we can take into Britain by 2017, and then 2018, 2019, 2020, it gets delivered then.
That very much complements Eddie's project, being onshore wind and also offshore. Offshore wind has its own difficulties, and I suppose for that reason, the first export to the UK is from onshore, in terms of Eddie and another group also. Offshore hasn't seriously been looked at in our jurisdiction, and the Isles report was a joint report commissioned by the three governments, led by Scotland, Northern Ireland and the Republic, to look at what joined-up thinking was needed for the very first time in terms of the various obstacles in terms of spatial planning, in spatial marine planning, because the legislation in the three jurisdictions was entirely incompatible. The whole licensing, the whole environmental area in terms of SEA and EIS, and then the grid infrastructure had to be looked at in great detail to see where you could connect to. There was never any question of connecting this to Ireland, because the grid just simply didn't exist. So it would have been, you know, the Isles project would sit in the Irish Sea and export to the UK. And I suppose, you know, it was never intended that, you know, the Irish government were never going to build the Isles project. Hopefully some of the work would help Eddie's project. And as offshore gets developed, and I know, you know, Mainstream and various other developers have quite an ambition in terms of offshore also, and getting the regulatory scene and the whole licensing scene right in this jurisdiction, and hopefully that would happen. I think we could have a complementary onshore-offshore grid, which would be part of the Western supergrid of Europe. It would be very much in line with European thinking in terms of there's a policy and a connecting fund called Connecting Europe, and the Connecting Europe Fund facilitates interconnection between countries in transport terms and in energy terms. And there is a possibility, I would say, that you know, the Isles project may be able to do one thing. It may be able to create some kickstart funding towards the work in the Irish Sea out of the Connecting Europe or cohesion funding, which would assist the private sector and possibly put some of the manifold in place. That's currently being looked at. And there's a further study on Isles about to start soon to look at the nuts and bolts in much greater detail. Of course, the whole deployment of offshore cabling in very deep waters is quite a challenge. The Irish Sea is a relative pond, but 40 metres deep, except in the very middle, whereas our north coast and our western coast are really too aggressive waters at the moment, and they wouldn't be on the low-lying fruit at all, despite the waves that beat off our west coast. Our best resource that we can harvest most easily is on the east coast and the northern coast, in the case of Northern Ireland. I really welcome it, and it's early days, but I have to compliment both governments in getting on with it. And you know, it's required. The MOU is required first, but very quickly behind it has to run the legislation and the regulation that will allow this to happen, because otherwise there would be bankability issues on conditions precedent and so on and so forth. We're well used to this in funding projects, so we don't see Eddie or anybody else held up And I'm confident that our own Department of Communications, Energy and Natural Resources understand the difficulty. It's a resourcing problem, frankly, and we're holding the presidency at the moment. It's not easy to get new stuff on the agenda, but the signing of the MOU yesterday should kickstart a much more intensive round of getting all the bits and bobs of regulatory mechanisms in place to allow this to happen.
They've given themselves a target of a year. You know, what PJ said is absolutely right. It's the detail of this arrangement so that you can get funding into it. It's all about, you know, allowing a contract to be built up between the Midlands of Ireland and the customer in England, lasting 20 years at a certain fixed price. Now, when you get that in place, then the investment follows. So, you know, this is a given, and I'm very glad PJ drew the attention to it. So I would say if we get it done this year, you know, we may be able to get something delivered. But any slippage from that would be quite disastrous. And we've actually paid for to be able to get a grid connection in 2017.
And are we optimistic? Are we done in a year?
Oh, listen, I mean, you wouldn't be in this game unless you were like a lunatic optimist, you know. So, yes, we're optimistic.
Good. PJ, how lunatic are you feeling?
We're all lunatic at the frontiers of energy at the moment, but we don't have any choice. It's you know, continue on a road with fossil fuels, insecurity of supply, rising costs, no handle on when or where it will be delivered and at what cost. And we have this, you know, free energy blowing around, and also in our seas, and that requires a bit more development. But it's not cheap to develop, but it's competitive to develop. And, you know, a lot of people would say, you know, on a small scale, it isn't competitive. But, I mean, we've got to accept the principle of anticipatory investment. In other words, the early starters will cost much more per unit of electricity, and they shouldn't be penalised. There needs to be a balancing fund somehow in the system, be it public or private or a combination of both, to ensure that that you know, it's made commercial to get it going, because otherwise we wouldn't have even an electrical grid in this country. It was put in 20s and 30s. You know, there was a lot of ambition, but there was a lot of courage then at the time. And I think another leap of courage is required now, because we haven't a ghost chance of meeting our 2020 targets unless we get our act together on the whole renewable scene.
Energy Cork was brought together as a consequence of a policy document which was written by the Cork Chamber, and really it was looking at the opportunity for Cork to optimise job creation and bringing different stakeholders together. It is very much, I mean, the tagline of Energy Cork is making more and using less. And so we do have that balance between the renewable side and the demand side, and management and building standards and construction. The two areas from the renewable side, UCC has a very strong research environment for wind, for biofuels, and for ocean energy. And ocean energy particularly is being supported by the government under the Programme for Research in Third Level Institutions. We're setting up something called the Beaufort Laboratory in Ringaskiddy, and that's part of the IMERC campus. The IMERC is the Irish Maritime and Energy Resource Cluster, and that's a joint venture between UCC, the Naval Service, and CIT. And our building is going to be a 3-acre site in the middle of a 17-acre site. And the unique opportunity for job creation around marine renewables, whether it is offshore wind or whether indeed the ocean energy research actually leads to real systems. I think they're at about quarter scale at the moment off the coast of Belmullet. But leaving that debate aside, I think there's a real opportunity for Cork in the renewable side. And then on the other side, and the building standards and demand side, we have the International Energy Research Centre, which is centred at Tyndall. And we've heard earlier on, I think Jeff mentioned from Billfinger, the support that, again, both of these sort of aspects are very much industry driven. And one of the main stakeholders in the IERC is Bill Finger, obviously, but United Technologies. And United Technologies is an interesting group, because one of the largest companies in the world, which doesn't actually do any manufacturing in Ireland, but decided to set up its research centre based in Tyndall. By the way, we have the newly appointed director of the IERC here, Professor Tony Day, who might want to say something a little bit more in a little bit more detail. But I think the job creation aspect of this is really crucial, and perhaps hasn't really been mentioned quite so much in the previous discussions. I think from the and there was this question about the social acceptability of renewable energy, and I think that the job creation aspect of that is something that will really bring forward the social acceptability. And I think what Eddie's talking about, the number of jobs that will be created as a result of this new interconnector, is really significant. But even from, so Energy Cork is in some sense agnostic. We recognise that there's going to have to be a partnership, and we recognise we work with Bord Gáis and obviously the offshore oil industry in Providence, particularly the offshore off the coast of Cork, which is great potential. But you know, again, it is very much industry driven, and I think it will lead to. So we've heard the other word, the ecosystem. We've heard that word in many times in this discussion and in previous discussions. But I think the Cork area with the harbour, the deepwater port, the possibilities for manufacturing, the possibilities for Cork research and ocean energy to become the leader in the world, when and if ocean energy actually becomes a real possibility, is very substantial.